Darkness isn't just the absence of light. It's heavy. It presses against your eyelids, mocking you. But the real torture isn't the blindness itself. It's what you see when your eyes finally start working again, and everyone else still thinks you're trapped in the dark. My name is Zachary. 2 months ago, I was a tech CEO with a highly successful logistics startup and a beautiful wife named Morgan. Today, I am a ghost in my own home. A blind man sitting in a leather armchair, supposedly helpless. They think I can't see them. They think the dark hides their sins. They are dead wrong. Let's go back to the night the lights went out. It was a rainy Tuesday in Austin. We had just left a charity gala celebrating our company's latest funding round. Morgan was laughing, her hand tucked tightly into my coat pocket. She smelled like jasmine and expensive champagne. We stepped off the curb on 4th Street. Then came the sound. The screech of burning rubber. A black pickup truck ran the red light, hydroplaning straight toward her. I didn't think. I reacted. I grabbed Morgan's waist and threw her onto the concrete sidewalk with every ounce of strength I had. The next microsecond was a blur of shattering glass, tearing metal, and a violent, crushing impact against my skull. When I woke up, the world was gone. There were no colors. No shapes. Just the steady, sterile beep of a heart monitor and the sharp scent of antiseptic. The lead neurologist at Austin Medical Center explained it to us later. Traumatic optic neuropathy. The impact had severely compressed my optic nerves. Total blindness. He couldn't promise if or when my sight would return. I remember the exact sound of Morgan's voice when the doctor delivered the news. She let out a sharp, breathless gasp. She gripped my hand so hard her fingernails dug into my palm. "I've got you, Zach," she whispered, her voice trembling with tears. "I'll be your eyes. I'll take care of everything. The house, the company, you. I'm not going anywhere." I believed her. For the first 3 weeks, I truly did. I was mourning the loss of my sight, but her presence was my anchor. Our startup, Nexologics, was at a critical juncture. We were finalizing a massive buyout offer from a Silicon Valley conglomerate. I held 51% of the company's shares. Morgan held 15%, and she handled our corporate finances. With me sidelined, she took the reins. She became the face of the company, the tragic hero managing a booming business while nursing her disabled husband. People love that kind of narrative. It makes great PR. But as the weeks crawled by, the atmosphere in our suburban home began to shift. The human brain adapts quickly when one sense is stripped away. My hearing became razor sharp. I started noticing things. The subtle cadence of a lie. The slight hesitation before an answer. The phantom scent of a men's cologne that didn't belong to me. I used to browse online forums out of pure curiosity, reading those classic betrayed cheater stories about men whose lives were ruined by infidelity. If you respect a man who keeps his head when his world goes dark, take a second to hit like and subscribe right now. Trust me, you will want to see how this chessboard moves. Because I never expected to become the main character in one of those tragic tales. But life has a twisted way of rewriting your script. It happened during our 4th week back from the hospital. Morgan brought home a man she introduced as Julian. She claimed he was a high-end physical therapist she hired out of pocket to assist with my rehabilitation. Julian had a deep, smooth voice. He spoke to me with an exaggerated, patronizing kindness. "We're going to get you back on your feet, Zachary," he said, clapping a heavy, condescending hand on my shoulder. My gut twisted immediately. I am a CEO. I hire and fire executives based on micro-expressions and behavioral cues. Julian didn't sound like a medical professional. He sounded like a salesman who had just walked into a gold mine. That evening, they thought I was asleep. I was sitting in the living room, my head leaned back against the headrest, wearing my thick, blackout sunglasses. Morgan and Julian were at the kitchen island, barely 10 feet away. They didn't even bother to whisper. "He's completely oblivious," Morgan muttered, her voice stripped of all the warmth she usually performed for me. "The doctor said the nerve damage might be permanent." He's just a vegetable with a bank account now. Good, Julian replied. I heard the distinct clink of 2 wine glasses touching. Our expensive Pinot Noir. The sooner we finalize the share transfer, the sooner we can liquidate his tech fund. Have you talked to the board? They're sympathetic, Morgan said, laughing softly. It was a cold, sharp sound I had never heard from her before. They think I'm a saint. I'll have his power of attorney signed by Friday. He signs whatever I put in front of him now. He has no choice. A normal man would have stood up. A normal man would have screamed, smashed the glasses, and thrown them out of his house. I didn't move a single muscle. My heart rate didn't even spike. I sat there in the dark, my face expressionless, absorbing the brutal reality. My own wife. The woman I took a steering column to the chest to protect. She wasn't just cheating. She was actively plotting to strip me of my life's work, leave me entirely broke, and completely blind. Let them be arrogant. Let them believe they won. They think I am a broken piece on their board. But they don't know I am the one controlling the game. Tomorrow morning, I am secretly calling my divorce attorney. The game hasn't ended. It just started. The silence that followed their little kitchen conversation was heavier than the darkness. They left the room, their footsteps fading down the hallway toward the master bedroom. The click of the door lock was a sharp, final punctuation mark. A normal man would have broken. He would have torn off his sunglasses, stormed down that hall, and let raw rage dictate his next move. I did not. I sat perfectly still. My hands rested flat on the cool leather of my armchair. My breathing remained slow, rhythmic, and controlled. I allowed myself exactly 60 seconds of grief. 1 minute to mourn the woman I thought I married. 1 minute to feel the sting of a betrayal so foul it made my stomach turn. Then I shut it off. The emotional valve was closed. Survival does not have room for tears. It requires strategy. It requires ice. Let us talk about a secret. The neurologist at Austin Medical Center said my optic nerves were compressed. He said recovery was a gamble. What he did not know, and what Morgan certainly did not know, was that the human body is unpredictable. It happened exactly 8 days ago. I was sitting in this exact chair, buried in the void. A sudden, blinding white pain shot through my temples. It felt like a hot needle piercing my brain. I clamped my jaws shut to keep from screaming. Then, the blackness cracked. A sliver of light pierced the void. First came blurry shapes. Then gray outlines. By the next morning, the fog had completely cleared. I could see everything. I could see the dust motes dancing in the sunlight. I could see the expensive modern art Morgan bought to redecorate my house. But I did not say a word. I did not blink when she walked into the room. I kept my eyes fixed on the empty space ahead of me. I kept my movements slow, clumsy, and deliberate. Why? Because an enemy who thinks you are powerless is an enemy who becomes sloppy. And Morgan and Julian were becoming incredibly sloppy. The next afternoon, the front door clicked open. It was 3 o'clock on a Friday. Morgan's high heels clicked against the polished hardwood floor. Beside her were the heavy, arrogant steps of Julian. "Zachary, sweetie, we're back," Morgan called out. Her voice carried that high-pitched, sing-song sweetness she used whenever she played the doting caretaker. "In the living room, Morgan," I answered. My voice was flat, perfectly balancing the exhaustion of a disabled man. They walked into the room. I kept my eyes trained slightly past her shoulder, staring blankly at the wall. Through the bottom edge of my peripheral vision under my dark lenses, I watched them. Julian was not wearing medical scrubs. He was wearing a tailored Tom Ford suit. My suit. Or rather, one bought with my corporate credit card. He looked at me, a cruel, mocking smirk plastering his face. He did not see a tech mogul. He saw a roadblock that had successfully been neutralized. "How are we feeling today, champ?" Julian asked. He walked right up to me and patted the top of my head twice. It was a demeaning, patronizing gesture. A pure power move designed to establish dominance over a man he thought could not fight back. The headaches are getting better, I said, keeping my hands completely relaxed on the armrests. But the darkness is still total. I can't see a thing. Shame. Julian sighed, though his eyes were dancing with malicious joy. He turned to Morgan and gave her a slow, deliberate wink. What happened next would test the limits of any man's sanity. Morgan did not just stand there. She walked over to Julian. Right in front of my face. Barely 3 feet away from my chair. She wrapped her arms around his neck. She pulled his face down to hers, and they kissed. It was not a quick, guilty peck. It was deep. Passionate. Arrogant. I could hear the wet sound of their lips parting. I could smell the sharp tang of her jasmine perfume mixing with his expensive cologne. Julian ran his hands down her back, gripping her waist tightly. He looked over her shoulder, staring straight at my blackout sunglasses, his eyes filled with a disgusting, triumphant mockery. He actually stuck his tongue out at me. Like a schoolyard bully who knew the teacher was not looking. They were enjoying this. The affair was no longer just about lust, it was a game of supreme disrespect. They believed my blindness made me an object, a piece of furniture in my own home. Morgan pulled away, breathless, giggling like a teenager. She patted Julian's chest and walked over to my mahogany desk in the corner of the room. She picked up a heavy gold Rolex watch, a gift from my father when I took Nexologics public. Julian, look at this, she said, her voice dropping the sweet act entirely. She held it up to the light. We should liquidate this next week. He doesn't need to know the time anymore anyway. What's a blind man need a Rolex for? Suits me better anyway. Julian chuckled. He took the watch from her hand and slid it onto his own wrist. He admired it, twisting his arm to catch the afternoon light. Fits perfectly. Thanks, Zachary. You've got great taste. He can't hear your insults, babe. He's too busy feeling sorry for himself. Morgan whispered, though she did not actually care if I did. She walked over to me, her face shifting instantly back into a mask of faux concern. She leaned down, placing a cold hand on my cheek. Zachary, honey, your physical therapy session is going to be a bit different today. Julian needs to review some medical and financial release forms with you. We need your signature so the insurance company can clear the funds for your long-term care. She pulled a thick manila folder from her designer bag. She opened it and laid the papers across my lap. She handed me a heavy Montblanc pen. Where do I sign, Morgan? I asked, my voice slightly trembling, mimicking a man completely dependent on his wife's guidance. Right here at the bottom of page 4, sweetie, she said. She took my right hand, guiding my fingers to the signature line. Just a quick signature. It protects us. It ensures our future. I looked down through the narrow bottom gap of my sunglasses. The text was clear. It was not an insurance release form. It was an irrevocable power of attorney and a full corporate asset transfer template. If I signed this, 51% of Nexologics shares would be transferred to her name immediately. I would effectively lock myself out of my own multi-million-dollar enterprise. Julian stood right behind her, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes drilling into me. He was waiting for the final stroke of the pen. They thought this was the endgame. They thought they were executing a flawless, victimless white-collar heist. I held the pen above the paper. I hesitated for a moment, letting the tension fill the room. I could see Morgan's knuckles turning white as she gripped the edge of my chair. She was desperate. They both were. Lacking patience is the fatal flaw of all criminals. Is everything okay, Zach? She asked, a sharp edge of panic bleeding into her tone. You need to sign it now so the courier can pick it up before the Austin banks close. Of course, I said softly. I did not sign my actual signature. Months ago, my private legal counsel and I established a secret duress signature protocol for high-stakes corporate negotiations. It looked almost identical to my standard signature, but with a tiny, imperceptible loop at the end of the letter Z. To any bank or automated verification system, it looked authentic. To my attorney, it was a silent alarm. It meant, *, I am being coerced. Freeze the execution but do not alert the presenter. I dragged the pen across the paper, completing the flawed signature. Morgan snatched the document away immediately, her eyes flashing with pure, unadulterated greed. She did not even try to hide her relief. She looked at Julian, nodding sharply. Perfect, Julian said, walking toward the door. Your therapy session is complete for today, Zachary. Rest up. You've done a great job. Thank you, Julian, I said to the empty wall. I don't know what I'd do without you both. They left the house 20 minutes later, the garage door rumbling shut. They were probably heading to a high-end restaurant downtown to celebrate their massive victory. They thought they had just inherited an empire. I stood up from my chair. I took off the blackout sunglasses and tossed them onto the desk. My eyes adjusted to the bright afternoon light streaming through the windows. The victim was gone. The CEO was back. I walked over to my personal computer, bypassed the standard biometric locks, and pulled up an encrypted communication channel. It was time to introduce a new player to their little game. It was time to call my attorney. Marcus arrived 40 minutes after Morgan's car pulled out of the driveway. He didn't use the front door. He used the service entrance near the garage, using a key fob I had given him years ago when we first built Nexologics. Marcus wasn't just my corporate attorney. He was my closest friend from Dartmouth, a man who knew the exact texture of my ambition. When he walked into the study, the sharp aroma of his black coffee hit me before he even spoke. I didn't turn my head immediately. I waited for the heavy click of his leather briefcase on the mahogany desk. You used the Z-loop, Zach, Marcus said. His voice was low, vibrating with a grim intensity. That document Morgan's notary uploaded to the county clerk's server 10 minutes ago. It's a total asset sweep. She thinks she owns your majority stake by Monday morning. I took off my sunglasses. I looked him dead in the eye. I know. I watched her do it. Marcus froze. His hand stayed clamped on the handle of his briefcase. He stared at me, his eyes widening as he processed the clear focus in my pupils. Your eyes. You can see. I've been able to see for a week, I said. My voice was a flat line. No anger. No tremor. Just data. She's sleeping with Julian, the physical therapist. He's wearing my dad's Rolex right now. They kiss right in front of me, Marcus. 3 feet away. They think I'm a vegetable with a bank account. Marcus swore under his breath. He sat down in the opposite chair, pulling out a thick, encrypted tablet. I knew she was cold, Zach. But this is sociopathic. If we go to the police right now with your testimony, we can halt the transfer. No, I countered immediately. The police mean a public trial. A public trial freezes Nexologics' valuation. The Silicon Valley buyout falls through. If the board smells a domestic scandal, they'll dump me to protect the stock price. I don't just want her out of my life, Marcus. I want her buried under the weight of her own greed. Marcus adjusted his glasses. A cold, professional smile touched his lips. He liked a calculated play. Then you're going to love what my corporate investigators found when we ran a deep background check on your friendly neighborhood physical therapist. He slid the tablet across the desk toward me. I looked at the files. The face staring back at me wasn't Julian the medical worker. It was Julian Vance, a disgraced former commodities trader from Chicago. He's a ghost, Marcus explained, tapping the screen. 3 years ago, he ran a fraudulent shadow fund. He blew through $40 million of high-net-worth investor money. He didn't just lose it, he stole a chunk of it to cover his own gambling debts. The SEC banned him for life. Right now, he owes over $4 million to some incredibly aggressive, unlicensed private lenders in New York. If he doesn't pay them back by the end of this fiscal quarter, he's a dead man. I leaned back, analyzing the data points. So he's desperate. He met Morgan, saw a lonely corporate wife with access to a tech fortune, and targeted her. Exactly, Marcus said. Morgan thinks she's the criminal mastermind here. She thinks Julian loves her. In reality, Julian is using her as a human shield to siphon your cash and pay off his loan sharks. She's already transferred $200,000 from your joint contingency account into a shell company registered in Delaware under Julian's name. It's a classic corporate bust-out scheme. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking together beautifully. They weren't an alliance. They were two parasites trying to eat the same host, totally blind to each other's true motives. But then Marcus's face changed. The professional detachment dropped. His skin went pale. "That's not the secret I came here to tell you, Zach," he whispered. "The financial fraud is nothing. It's the accident." My body went perfectly still. The accident on 4th Street? Marcus pulled up a different file. It was a forensic engineering report, stamped by a private automotive investigator we use for logistics liability cases. There were high-resolution photographs of the undercarriage of my ruined sports car. "I thought it was weird that your car hydroplaned at 30 miles per hour," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Your vehicle has state-of-the-art electronic brake distribution. It shouldn't have failed." So had our guy pulled the wreck from the police impound lot before Morgan could liquidate it for scrap. He zoomed in on a specific image. A stainless steel braided brake line. It wasn't ruptured from an impact. The edges were perfectly flat, clean, and shiny. "It was cut, Zach," Marcus said. "A clean slice with a heavy-duty hydraulic cable cutter. Someone bled your brake fluid about an hour before you left that charity gala. You didn't push Morgan out of the way of a random rogue truck. You pushed her out of the way of a trap she helped set." The room went dead silent. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner sounded like an executioner's drum. I looked at the severed line. The image burned into my mind. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. The short burst of grief I had allowed myself earlier was validated. They didn't just want my money. They wanted my life. They wanted a multi-million-dollar corporate life insurance payout, which Morgan would have collected if that truck had hit me dead on. My survival was their only mistake. Let me ask you a question. If you found out your wife didn't just cheat on you, but she actually tried to erase you from existence, would you call the cops? Or would you wait, let her sleep in your bed, and plan a punishment worse than any prison cell? Leave a comment below with what you would do. Because my choice was already made. "Zach," Marcus said, staring at my expressionless face. "This is attempted murder. We take this to the district attorney. They go down for 20 years. "No," I answered, my voice dripping with a dark, mocking calm. "A criminal case gives them a slick defense strategy. They delay. They blame an unknown mechanic. I want absolute ruin. Legal and financial liquidation." I stood up, walking slow toward the tall window. I watched the shadows stretch long across our manicured front lawn. "Morgan wants my majority shares. We will let her have them. But we are going to execute a quiet, comprehensive debt restructuring plan before the transfer goes live." Marcus narrowed his eyes, a sharp, predatory realization flashing across his face. "The distressed commercial real estate shell subsidiary in West Texas." "Exactly." I nodded, checking the wall clock. "We use her fraudulent power of attorney. We dump all our toxic liabilities and unpaid corporate tax obligations into her new portfolio. She will hand it over to Julian, and Julian will trigger a massive IRS money laundering alarm." I heard the distant rumble of the garage door opening downstairs. I slipped my dark sunglasses back over my eyes. "Let's play." Marcus slipped out the back door just as the automated headlights of Morgan's Mercedes SUV swept across the frosted glass of the kitchen window. I pulled my blackout sunglasses down over my face. I sank back into the deep leather armchair. I let my limbs go slack. I assumed the posture of a victim. A man stripped of his vision, his power, and his future. The heavy oak front door opened. The click of her stilettos on the hardwood floor was loud. It was rhythmic. It carried the arrogant cadence of a woman who believed she had just stolen a kingdom. "Zachary? Honey?" she called out. The false warmth in her voice was sickening. "In the study, Morgan." I replied. I kept my tone soft. Fatigued. Completely broken. She walked in. She didn't come to kiss me. She didn't ask how my head felt. Instead, I saw her through the small gap beneath my lenses. She was holding the manila folder tightly against her chest. Her eyes were bright. Greedy. Dilated with the high of a successful heist. She set the folder down on the corner of my desk and let out a long, theatrical sigh. The courier took the documents. She lied, her voice dripping with artificial exhaustion. The bank approved the emergency medical release. You don't have to worry about a thing anymore, Zach. I'm handling it all. Thank you, Morgan, I said. I reached out blindly, letting my hand graze the empty air before she finally caught it. Her grip was loose. Impatient. She didn't want to hold my hand. She wanted to hold my bank accounts. I feel so useless like this. The board, are they okay with you taking over the signature authority? She let out a soft, mocking chuckle, skiing under her breath. The board thinks you're a hero, sweetie. And they think I'm an angel for stepping up. They didn't question a single line. They just want the Silicon Valley buyout to go through smoothly. Now you just need to rest your poor head. She walked away from me, pulling her smartphone from her pocket. She began typing rapidly. I knew exactly who she was texting. Julian. The commodities fraudster wearing my father's Rolex. She thought she was a genius playing a simpleton. She didn't realize she was a puppet walking directly onto a stage I had built. The next morning, the real work began. A master chess player does not attack the opponent's pieces directly. He manipulates the opponent into moving their pieces exactly where he wants them. Morgan was sitting at the dining table, sipping her sugar-free vanilla latte. The glow of her tablet illuminated her face. She was reviewing the Nexalogics asset sheet, preparing the final ledger for the Silicon Valley conglomerate buyout. Julian was sitting next to her. He had shown up at 9 a.m. sharp under the guise of an early morning rehab session. He was wearing a fresh linen shirt. My father's gold Rolex glinted on his wrist under the morning sun. I walked into the dining room. I used my graphite cane, tapping it against the baseboards with practiced clumsiness. Careful there, big guy, Julian said. I heard the smirk in his voice. He didn't even stand up to help me. He just watched me struggle to find the edge of the dining chair. Don't want you breaking a leg on top of everything else. Sit down before you hurt yourself. I'm fine, Julian, I said, sitting down heavily. I looked blankly toward the kitchen island. Morgan, there's something we need to discuss regarding the corporate restructuring. Something urgent. Morgan didn't look up from her tablet. Her fingers flew across the glass screen. What is it, Zach? I'm pretty busy with the logistics logs right now. The attorneys need everything finalized by the end of the week. It's about Apex Horizons Realty, I said. I let a calculated note of panic creep into my voice. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. When you transfer the Nexalogics portfolio, you must exclude Apex Horizons. Leave that specific shell company completely out of the deal. Keep it under my personal name. Morgan's fingers stopped moving across the screen. She looked up. Her eyes narrowed. Apex Horizons? The real estate subsidiary in West Texas? Why? It's just an old holding company we use for warehouse storage. It hasn't generated active revenue in 18 months. It's complicated. I lied, lowering my voice as if terrified someone might overhear us. I looked around the room blindly, turning my head slightly to simulate a man trying to track sound. Before the accident, I moved a significant portion of our unallocated capital into Apex. It holds our private liquid reserve. Almost $4 million in offshore tech bonds. It's completely unaudited by the main board. If the Silicon Valley buyers find out about it during the due diligence phase, they will claim it as part of the acquisition. We will lose it. I saw Julian's posture change instantly. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his eyes locked on my face. His nostrils flared. The scent of $4 million of unaudited liquid cash was intoxicating to a man who owed aggressive loan sharks his life. He kicked Morgan's leg under the table. I saw the subtle movement through the lower rim of my lenses. "4 million?" Morgan whispered. Her voice was sharp. Greedy. The mask of the grieving, supportive wife was slipping further every second. "You never told me about this, Zachary. Why would you hide that much capital in a West Texas shell company?" "I wanted it to be a surprise," I said, putting on a perfect performance of a vulnerable, naive husband who just wanted to please his wife. "A safety net for our retirement. A private fund for us to travel, buy a place in Aspen, whatever you wanted. But now that I'm blind, I just want it safe. If you transfer it to your name or integrate it into the main sale, the IRS might trigger a capital gains audit. Just leave it alone, Morgan. Promise me you won't touch the West Texas accounts. Let it sit in my private name." "Of course, honey," Morgan said. But her voice was detached. Cold. Her mind was already racing, calculating, scheming. "I won't touch it if it's dangerous. Let's just focus on the main tech portfolio for now." They didn't even wait for me to leave the room to start celebrating. They thought I was a deaf, blind idiot who couldn't read the heavy silence between them. I stood up, pretending to look for my water glass, and then slowly guided myself back toward the study using my cane. I left the study door cracked open exactly 2 inches. I sat down at my desk, slipped my wireless earpiece in, and activated the high sensitivity directional microphone hidden inside the dining room light fixture. "Did you hear that?" Julian's voice hissed through the speaker. He was ecstatic. He was practically panting with excitement. $4 million in unaudited tech bonds. Under a separate shell company. Morgan, that's our ticket out. We don't just take the 15% from the Nexologix buyout. We take the West Texas cash right now. We can move to Miami. We can clear my obligations and buy a yacht. But he said the IRS might audit it if we move it, Morgan muttered, showing a rare, fleeting moment of caution. Zachary is meticulous with his accounting. If he's scared of an audit, there might be a paper trail. He's a blind coward, Julian snapped. I could hear him pacing the floor, his leather shoes squeaking against the wood. He's terrified of his own shadow now. The accident broke his spirit. Listen to me, Morgan. We use the power of attorney he signed yesterday. We don't exclude Apex Horizons from the asset sweep. We absorb it. We transfer the entire ownership of Apex Horizons directly into your private LLC, Morgan Vance Holdings. Then I can liquidate the tech bonds through my offshore broker in the Caymans within 48 hours. By the time the Silicon Valley deal closes next month, the cash will be long gone. Zachary will be sitting here in the dark, wondering where his retirement went. He's blind, Morgan. What is he going to do? Sue us? Are you sure we won't get caught? Morgan asked. I could hear the thrill in her voice. The psychological corruption was complete. She wasn't just stealing anymore. She was enjoying the absolute thrill of destroying me. If we do this, he will be completely ruined. Caught by who? A blind man? Julian laughed. It was a loud, ugly, arrogant sound. He signs whatever you tell him to. He thinks you're his savior. Tomorrow, bring him the amended schedule. Tell him it's just a routine compliance form for the main merger. He'll sign it without a second thought. I sat in my dark study, a cold, mocking smile carving its way onto my face. Let's pause here for a moment. Have you ever seen someone run face first into a concrete wall while laughing? It is a truly beautiful sight. What Morgan and Julian did not know, what their blind greed prevented them from seeing, was that Apex Horizons Realty did not contain $4 million in cash. It contained $4 million in toxic commercial debt, unpaid state tax liabilities from a failed warehouse acquisition, and a massive paper trail of fraudulent overvaluations that Marcus and I had isolated months ago. By forcing the ownership of Apex Horizons into Morgan's private LLC using my fraudulent power of attorney, she was not stealing my wealth. She was legally assuming absolute personal liability for a financial time bomb designed to trigger a federal audit. The next afternoon, Morgan walked into the study. Julian was standing by the door, acting like a sentinel, his arms crossed over his chest, my father's Rolex shining on his wrist. "Zachary, sweetie," she said, placing a new set of documents on my desk. "The legal team said we need to sign a quick addendum to protect your personal assets from the Silicon Valley audit. It's just an indemnity waiver for the West Texas properties. To keep them safe, just like you wanted. Sign right here." I didn't hesitate. I reached out, took the heavy Mont Blanc pen, and signed the document. I used my standard signature this time. No Z-loop. This one needed to be fully valid. This one needed to stick to her like industrial glue. "Thank you, Morgan," I said, looking blankly through my dark lenses. "I don't know what I would do without your financial mind." "I'm just doing my job, honey," she said, snatching the papers with a triumphant smirk. She turned to Julian and flashed a victory sign. They walked out, leaving me alone in the quiet room. I took off my glasses. I picked up my encrypted phone and dialed Marcus. "It's done," I said to my attorney. "She just executed the transfer of Apex Horizons into her personal holding entity. The paper trail is locked." "Perfect," Marcus replied, the sound of rapid keyboard clicks echoing on his end. "I'm routing the corporate forensic audit report directly to the regional IRS enforcement branch in Dallas. By Monday morning, Morgan's private LLC will be flagged for immediate asset freezing and a federal fraud investigation. She just signed her own financial death warrant, Zach. Let them enjoy their weekend," I said softly, looking out at the bright Texas sky. "The storm hits on Monday." Monday morning arrived with a crisp, brutal clarity. The sky over downtown Austin was a cold, featureless gray. I sat at the end of the massive mahogany conference table on the top floor of the Nexologics headquarters. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the Texas Capitol building. I wore my blackout sunglasses. My graphite cane rested against my knee. To anyone entering the room, I was a tragic figure. A broken founder about to be phased out of my own empire. The double glass doors swung open at exactly 9:55 a.m. Morgan walked in first, wearing a sharp, cream-colored power suit. Her heels clicked against the concrete floor with aggressive confidence. Right behind her was Julian, wearing another one of my bespoke suits, his chest puffed out. On his left wrist, my father's gold Rolex caught the overhead LED lights. They didn't look like corporate executives. They looked like conquerors arriving to claim their spoils. "Morning, Zachary," Morgan said. Her voice lacked even a shred of the faux affection she used at home. It was cold. Transactional. She didn't sit next to me. She took the seat at the head of the table, my seat. "Good morning, Morgan." "Julian," I said, keeping my head turned slightly to the left, mimicking a blind man tracking her voice. Julian sat next to her, throwing an arm over the headrest. He looked at me with absolute disdain. "Let's get this over with quickly, champ. Morgan has a lot of structural changes to implement once the Silicon Valley team signs the closing documents at noon." "Of course," I said softly. "Are the board members running late?" Morgan let out a mocking laugh, opening her tablet. "The board isn't coming, Zachary. I called an executive session variance. Since I hold your power of attorney and your shares were transferred to Morgan Vance Holdings on Friday, I don't need a quorum. You're just here as a legal formality. To verify your identity for compliance." She leaned across the table, her face inches from mine. "Let's be real, Zach. You're done. A blind man can't run a global logistics network. You're going to sit in that big house, we will provide a modest monthly medical stipend, and I am going to take this company to the moon. Don't make a scene. Don't make this difficult." Julian leaned forward too, tapping his fingers on the table. The gold Rolex clicked against the wood. "Listen to your wife, Zach. You had a good run. But the world belongs to people who can actually look it in the eye. You're just dead weight now." I didn't move. My hands remained flat on the table. My heart rate stayed perfectly steady at 60 beats per minute. I looked straight ahead, through the dark lenses, watching the smug, arrogant smiles on their faces. They truly believed they were untouchable. They believed they had committed the perfect, victimless crime. I understand, I said calmly. But before we finalize the Silicon Valley buyout, we need to address the asset schedule. Specifically, the West Texas subsidiary, Apex Horizons Realty. Morgan frowned, a flicker of irritation crossing her brow. I told you on Saturday, Zach, I took care of it. I used the POA to absorb Apex Horizons into my private holding company. Julian's offshore broker already initiated the wire transfer to liquidate the tech bonds. The money is moving as we speak. It's handled. Is it? I asked. I let a slow, mocking smile creep onto my lips. Before Morgan could answer, the conference room doors clicked open again. Marcus walked in. He wasn't alone. Behind him were two men in dark, tailored suits and a woman carrying a heavy leather briefcase. They didn't look like Silicon Valley tech executives. They carried the unmistakable, rigid aura of federal law enforcement. What is the meaning of this? Morgan snapped, standing up. She glared at Marcus. This is a private executive session, Marcus. Get your team out of my boardroom. It's not your boardroom, Morgan, Marcus said smoothly. He walked over to my side of the table and set his briefcase down. And these aren't my corporate attorneys. This is Special Agent Miller and Senior Auditor Reynolds from the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. Julian's face went instantly pale. He stood up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. He instinctively tucked his left wrist behind his back, trying to hide the Rolex. This is absurd. We haven't violated any corporate compliance laws. The share transfer was fully notarized. The female auditor Reynolds stepped forward. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of heavily stamped financial documents, sliding them across the table toward Morgan. Mrs. Vance, at 8 a.m. today, a federal judge in the Western District of Texas signed a freeze order on all personal and corporate assets tied to Morgan Vance Holdings. Your private bank accounts, your credit lines, and your real estate portfolios are officially locked. What? Morgan gasped, her voice cracking as she stared at the paperwork. On what grounds? This is a legitimate tech transfer. It's a federal tax evasion and money laundering investigation. Agent Miller stated, his voice like iron. Your holding entity just assumed 100% ownership of Apex Horizons Realty. That company carries $4 million in illicit, fraudulent debt liabilities and unrecorded foreign tax shelters. By executing that transfer through a fraudulent power of attorney, you legally assumed personal responsibility for those crimes. Furthermore, Mr. Vance's offshore broker in the Caymans was flagged by FINRA 3 hours ago for attempting to launder those toxic liabilities into liquid capital. Morgan turned her head slowly, her eyes wide with terror as she looked at Julian. Julian, you said it was safe. You said your broker cleared it. Julian didn't look at her. He was sweating through his linen shirt. His eyes darted toward the door, evaluating his exit options. She did it. She's the CFO. She signed the paperwork, not me. I'm just her physical therapist. Sit down, Mr. Vance, Agent Miller said, his hand moving subtly toward his jacket hip. Julian slowly collapsed back into his seat, his arrogance completely shattered. I reached up with my right hand. I took off my blackout sunglasses. I tossed them onto the mahogany table. They slid across the polished wood, stopping right in front of Morgan's trembling hands. I looked her straight in the eyes. My focus was razor sharp. My pupils constricted under the bright boardroom lights. Morgan stared at me, her mouth dropping open. She took a step back, her hands gripping the edge of the table for support. Zachary, your eyes, you can see. I stood up slowly from my chair, towering over her. I've been able to see everything, Morgan, I said. My voice was a terrifying whisper that cut through the silence of the room. I saw you kiss him in my living room. I saw him wear my father's watch. I watched you slide those fraudulent documents across my lap, thinking I was a blind fool. I let you take Apex Horizons because I knew your bottomless greed would make you blind to the trap." She wept bitterly, pointing a shaking finger at Julian. "Zach, please! He forced me!" "Save it," I replied coldly. "The IRS is the least of your problems." Marcus activated the smart screen, flashing forensic photos of my cut brake line and footage of Julian slicing it. "Austin detectives are downstairs with arrest warrants for attempted capital murder," Marcus announced. Morgan collapsed completely as Agent Miller pulled out steel handcuffs. The metal clicked around their wrists, shattering their stolen dreams forever. I sat back down, calm, cold, and entirely vindicated. The intense chess game was over. I had won. The click of the handcuffs was the last sound Julian made before the federal agents dragged him out of the room. He looked small. Defeated. The Tom Ford suit no longer fit his posture. Morgan didn't look at him. She couldn't. Her polished, high society world had vanished in a matter of minutes. As the police escorted her past my chair, she stopped. Her face was a smear of black mascara and pale sweat. "You planned this," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and pure hatred. "You sat there and let me think I was winning." I didn't lean away. I didn't smile. I simply looked through her. "Losing your vision is a medical tragedy, Morgan," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet boardroom. "Losing your mind to greed is a personal choice. Enjoy the fallout." The Silicon Valley acquisition went through at noon sharp, exactly as scheduled. Marcus finalized the paperwork while the local news channels in Austin were still broadcasting footage of the flashing police lights outside our corporate headquarters. Because Morgan had legally transferred her shares into a frozen holding entity under federal fraud investigation, her equity was seized by the state to cover the toxic liabilities of Apex Horizons. She didn't get a single dime from the multi-million-dollar buyout. Julian's aggressive loan sharks in New York found out about his federal asset freeze by dinner time. In federal custody, he was safe from them, but only for now. He faces 20 years for attempted capital murder. Morgan faces 15 for conspiracy and financial fraud. They will have plenty of time to discuss their strategy in a federal penitentiary. I went back to our suburban home that evening. Not to stay. Just to pack up my father's personal belongings. The massive suburban estate was already listed on the hot Austin luxury real estate market. I stood out on the back patio, watching the sunset bleed deep red over Lake Austin. The gray fog of the morning was completely gone. My eyes were clear. My vision was perfect. I looked down at my bare left wrist, where my father's gold Rolex used to sit. The Austin Police Department had recovered it from Julian during his booking process. It was currently sitting in an evidence bag downtown, waiting for release. I didn't mind the wait. Time belongs to me again. Betrayal is a strange thing. It relies entirely on the arrogant assumption that the person you are hurting will remain exactly who they were before you struck. People like Morgan and Julian never expect the victim to evolve into the architect of their destruction. If you believe true justice is built on silence, patience, and a calculated paper trail rather than empty, violent rage, hit that subscribe button right now. Now, think about the people closest to you. Who is really sitting in the dark? Leave a comment below right now and let me know if you think Morgan got what she truly deserved.